All right, I see the red light. So hi, this is Wendy Lynch, and we want to welcome you to the Springtime Slow Cooker webinar. And this is presented to you by University of Florida IFAS Extension webinar team. And on the screen, you're going to see a few more sessions that we have coming up. April 20th, we've got Meals in an Instant. April 27th, Plant-Powered Meals, Thrifty and Delicious. So a little bit about who we are. I know a lot of you have been with us before, but for those that are new, again, welcome. And we are the University of Florida Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences. And what we do is we're part of a nationwide educational network that extends research-based information from the university out to all of our communities. And our mission is to provide resources for individuals, families, to sustain and improve quality of life. And this is our webinar team for this three-part series. We've got Dr. Wendy Dahl, who is at the university. We've got Julie England in Seminole County, myself, Wendy Lynch in Putnam County, Marie Eric, Liberty County, and Citrus County, we've got Sarah Ellis. So if you are new to the Zoom platform, if you hover your arrow using your mouse down at the bottom of your screen, a little black bar should pop up where you're going to see the chat box. We encourage you to use it. You have the option to either send a message just to panelists, which would be myself and the webinar team, or you have an option to send it to all panelists and attendees. So any questions you may have will be mine in the chat box, so please pop them in there. Also, I'm trying to think of anything else in that little section there. I think that might be it for that. Check the chat box if you haven't already, because the slide handout and recipe handout is in there already. At the end, if you're familiar, we send a quick, short, and sweet evaluation right after the webinar because we'd like your feedback. Just a brief disclaimer. So the information we use in this particular webinar is for educational purposes only. So you may see a brand or a particular product. We don't support or endorse that particular product. It's just what we have available to use for the presentation. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Julie England for Springtime Slow Cooker Meals.
Well, good afternoon all. So Marie and I will be tag teaming through this. And so do you kind of look like the person in this picture? It's like, what do I cook? You know, I'm tired of the same thing. I've got a slow cooker and all I ever do is make the same old thing. So our goal is to give you some new ideas. So in your handout, so in the links, there's the slide set as well as a couple different handouts. One is a handout I regularly use for my in-person programs. One's a great one also from North Dakota State Extension, and then some other random ones, including North Dakota State's absolutely fabulous spinach artichoke dip in a slow cooker recipe. So you've got lots of new ideas to help you save time, reduce some of that meal prep stress, hopefully eat healthier, and just add variety and cut out some of that whining from you from trying to figure out what to eat and whining from your family for eating the same old thing. So advantages to the slow cooker. And in the chat box, tell people when was the last time you used your slow cooker. So advantages, you know, you prep it and forget it. You know, when you're working out of your home, you can stick it in the morning, come home and your house smells like dinner. Now you still, since you're working from home, still easy prep, you know, multiple meals, we'll talk about that. It tenderizes inexpensive cuts of meat. It doesn't heat up your kitchen as well. Some of the disadvantages, at least in our house, is it's easy to overeat when you have this big pot of meals when you're thinking about multiple meals. Sometimes you got to keep the family from eating everything so that you do have leftovers. Some of the traditional slow cooker meals are kind of heavy and don't have enough vegetables in it. So we want to encourage you to add more vegetables. So even if you do one of these more traditional, like a pot roast or beef stew, that sometimes are pretty usual things that people make, making sure that you put a lot of vegetables and maybe not having the huge chunk of meat in there unless you're going to use that same chunk of meat for multiple meals. And also to save what Southerners call the pot liquor, which is all the good cooking stuff that goes down to the bottom of the pot when you cook. And that makes great soups, things like that. When I do a pot roast, I save it, I put it in the refrigerator, I skim off the fat, and then I use it for soups. And it's got lots of flavor in it. So let's think about chicken. Lots of, we eat a lot of chicken, and at least in our family we do, to think about ways to extend that chicken. And a couple different ways that you can just cook instead of spending money, for example, on a roast chicken at your local store, to cook your own. And so there's two different ways I like. And this one is when you're going to do more than meat for freezing, when you want the chicken broth, so you actually put your chicken in there and you put water in it, and then you end up with the broth. But as down in the bottom here, you want to make sure that you put in maybe celery, carrots, onions, whatever you happen to have of that in your refrigerator, and maybe some spices, and that way your broth is going to have fuller flavor. And yes, you can buy canned broth, but what you make on your own is going to have more flavor. And my absolutely favorite way to cook a chicken in a slow cooker is kind of you roast it essentially in your slow cooker. And this is one I've made a few years ago, and the skin turns out nice and crispy. It's so easy. You can season it the night before. You keep it in a plastic bag in your refrigerator. In the morning you get up, you just plop that chicken in your slow cooker, turn it on, and be out the door. And you come home and you have a nice ready roast chicken. If you're watching your salts and things like that, you have control over your seasonings. You can make it spicy if you like, or if you're a non-spicy family, you can do all kinds of different things to it. And this is really one of my go-to recipes. It's got 5 ingredients. And if you don't have all these ingredients in your house, just skip them. It's basically a jar of salsa, however spicy you want it. Frozen corn. If you don't have frozen corn, throw in canned or skip it. Black beans, so you rinse them to get some of the sodium off it. Throw a little bit of cumin in. Throw your boneless, skinless chicken breast down. You put your chicken breast first, and then mix everything and put it on top. Plug it in, and come home, and you've got this great shredded chicken that you can make tacos. You can put on your salad. You can do with it whatever you want. And that's one of the recipes in your handout. So it's certainly one of my go-tos. And I know this is one of Marie's go-tos, so I'm going to turn it over to her.
Absolutely. This is a family favorite. It is one of these that you use what you have on hand. If you are trying to watch your fat, for instance. So this is a very simple recipe. I just take either chicken thighs or either boneless, skinless chicken breasts. I use a can of cream of mushroom soup. You can use the fat-free if you prefer. I dice a medium-sized onion, and I use black pepper. I do not add salt. We try to watch our salt intake here at home, and so I'm a very big stickler of not adding salt. It really doesn't need it. So you will see on the top right corner picture, I actually take a gravy mix packet, and I am one of these people that I will look for any shortcut in the kitchen, and I cannot stand there and whisk and whatever. And so I just take my gravy mix and I put it into a little Rubbermaid container, and I will add the water, and I put the lid on, and I shake it up, and I pour it right in. It takes no time at all, and it's just a quick way of getting something done and out of the way. So I put it into my crock pot, and depending on what I have going on, I gave you the different cooking times there. So if it's going to be an all-day thing, then I will put it on low and just let it go. If I'm at home and I want to have this sooner, then I'll put it on high, and in 3.5 to 4 hours, it is done. And you can see the final product there. But what I really love about this recipe is that I can use it for numerous things. So I can take it and I can put it with a side of asparagus and maybe a salad, and that's my meal. Or I can take it and I can shred it and I can make chicken and rice, or I can make chicken spaghetti with this. It has many, many uses. I've used it for chicken Alfredo. So it is just super simple. Just use your imagination and roll with it. So other ideas for cooked chicken, barbecue chicken sliders. So if you didn't want to have that gravy base and you just left that off, of the previous recipe, you would end up with some great chicken there, and you could use it to top a salad. You could add a little bit of barbecue sauce and make sliders, or again, you could go back and you could do a chicken and broccoli Alfredo with it and just use the Alfredo sauce. So this is my question to you guys. If you would just put in the chat box, what would you make if you did that recipe one or two ways?
And this is the chicken that when I made it, that's from the moisture method when I put the water in it, the first one I mentioned. So lots of different, let's see, what do I do with mine? So I really do like having it in the freezer that I can pull out for salad. Somebody else put chicken tacos, chicken enchiladas. We're coming to your house, Vicki.
Yes.
Chicken and broccoli.
Yes.
Lots of great things that you can do. Chicken noodle soup.
That quick chicken noodle soup, yes, that is a very definite. And you could use some of what Julie calls the pot liquor. Out of there, if you didn't add that gravy mix, or even if you did, it depends on if you wanted a creamy chicken noodle soup or if you wanted just a broth chicken noodle soup. That would be very simple to do. Very simple with that recipe.
Ooh, chicken and dumplings. We got lots of good ideas. All righty.
Yes. All right. So looking at the difference on what you choose as your cut of meat, really basically a chicken breast or a chicken thigh has the same amount of calories. The difference you're going to see is really the fat content. So it just depends on what's available to you and your preference as well. But a chicken thigh is not too much worse than eating a chicken breast. So, you know, it has just a little bit more fat and a little bit more cholesterol, but that does give you a very good visible comparison there.
And also, I found in the past that sometimes in a slow cooker, the chicken thighs are a little bit more forgiving for some of the longer cooking recipes. So like the chicken jambalaya that's in the recipe handout uses the thighs. And so just depends maybe on the moistness of your ingredients that you may be putting in there, or how long you're cooking.
That's very true. So very true. So if you stop and you look at the different meats, you know, we've talked a lot about chicken, but we don't want to skip over other things. You know, if you think about a chuck roast or a flank steak or a blade or a brisket, that skirt steak or short ribs, you need to remember too that it also, because you're cooking low and slow, it's a very forgiving method of cooking because it'll really tenderize those meats a lot. They will literally fall apart. So putting together those meals, it makes a big difference. You can think about when on the pork side, you can think about butts or tenderloins, spare ribs, or a shoulder. So there are a lot of options there for you.
And I just want to point out that the picture below is what we had last night for supper, what I had today for lunch, which was, in this case, a chuck roast with pepperoncinis and fresh mushrooms. I let it cook all day. So we're going to be eating that for several days.
Yes. But that leads right into what we're talking about here. You're planning for multiple days. And I do this a lot. I will maybe put a London broil in my crock pot, and I will, you know, add my onions and carrots and celery and things like that. And we might have roast that night, but then I will take whatever is there plus all that fond, as Julie calls the pot liquor, and I will take that, and that will be my base for my vegetable soup the next day. If I have any roast left over, I'll throw that in there, or it'll just be just that beef broth as my base. So you can plan for multiple meals. You might have that traditional roast dinner one night. You might have sliced roast beef sandwiches for lunch the next day, and then take all of the broth and that au jus that's left, and then use that for your soup base. So there are so many different options, so many different ways to make things and put things together. Your imagination can run wild with this stuff. I promise you. So does anybody have any other ideas? I see somebody does mac and cheese in the crock pot, and I've done that as well. I do that. I love it.
Me too.
So the next slide is talking about casseroles and soups. And one of my favorites is that vegetable lasagna. And everybody is putting their garden in right now. You can take a zucchini and yellow squash, and you can chop that up with onion and some bell pepper, whatever you love, mushrooms, whatever it is that you desire. And what I do is I saute those vegetables, and I will get everything just starting to get really tender. The onions get a little bit clear and translucent. And then I take a jar of my favorite spaghetti sauce. Doesn't matter, any brand will do. And I will actually put that in there, and then I will add about a half a jar of water just to add some extra moisture there, because I am putting this into a crock pot. Then I will take my crock and I will literally start layering things. So I will put down my vegetables on the bottom, and I will preface this with saying, yes, I do a non-stick spray, and I spray all of my crocks before I use them with most every recipe. But you put down a layer of that. I put down a layer of the lasagna noodles and a layer of cheese. If you want to add ricotta in there, you can do whatever your heart desires. I will actually put down that layer of cheese, and I'll put down a layer of spinach, and then I will put down more of the vegetable mixture, and I will keep layering. I generally cook this for 3 hours, because I have found that if I let it go for that last 4th hour, my noodles start not being as great of a texture as I prefer. So this is one of those that I can put on a Saturday morning, and that's like our lunch that day. And then, it's really great to have that evening, and I don't have to do anything else. So that's one of my favorite go-tos. I have done jambalaya. I have done breakfast casseroles. I have done tomato soup and potato soup. I've done the traditional beef chili, chicken chili. So what are some of the other favorites? I see there's an eggplant as a good substitute for a heavy carb pasta noodles. I will have to try that.
So Marie, a couple of people asked the question that I wanted to ask you, which is, do you cook your lasagna noodles before you put them in?
No, they go in dry. They go in dry.
And they're the regular ones, not the no-baked ones? I mean,
they are the regular. I actually use the wheat pasta.
Oh, good. Good reminder to make sure that you're trying to get some more fiber in there.
Yes.
All righty. So with that, let's talk about, here's one of the recipes actually in your handout, one of my go-tos for some of my classes, but a good illustration of a couple things. A, using a liner if you so choose, which we'll talk about in a second, but also prepping the night before, because I don't know about you in the morning, I am not a morning person. And so having stuff chopped up, ready to go that I can just throw in, having my stuff out on the counter for all the other ingredients that I can put everything in. One of the things I want to mention here also, because this is something that some people do fairly often, is they prep everything the night before and they just stick the crock in the refrigerator. We definitely don't recommend that you do it that way for a couple of reasons. The main reason is related to food safety, is the fact that your crock's cold, and then when you take it out and put it in your slow cooker, that it takes a while for it to get up to temperature. And it's going to slow your cooking time, but also your food is going to remain at what we call the danger zone, which is between 40 degrees and 140 degrees, where bacteria could tend to grow. So if you're going to prep it beforehand, you could prep it in the bag if you wanted to, or like in this picture, do some of it in a Ziploc bag and just have everything out handy. And then you come home and you have this great lentil soup, because lentils as well as split peas are nice to use because you don't have to pre-soak them. So yet another way to make it easy to prepare food. So
and Julie, I will also add on to that people don't realize that when they take that crock out of the refrigerator and you put it into your actual cooker, that crock can actually crack.
Yep, that makes sense as well. They're not made for that. So,
They are not. So it's just a all around no.
and also when you're prepping food, make sure, for example, if you're going to do your meat, to keep your meat separate from your produce before the night before. You mix your meat in with your produce and other ingredients right when you put them in the slow cooker. Okay, so this is, if my thing would move. All right, so this is one of the recipes that's really good, but it's not in my regular scheme of things because of the fact that it only takes 4 hours to cook. And so I could make it now when I'm working from home, but on a regular basis, it's not going to work for me. And so that's kind of the thing about choosing your recipes, is finding the ones that work into your lifestyle. But this is a really good one. It's got eggplant, obviously it's got fresh mushrooms, it's got crushed tomatoes, and then kind of like with Marie putting her lasagna on whole wheat pastas, to think about using a whole grain pasta that'll provide you more fiber. This fiber is really important to have in your diet. You should be aiming for about 14 grams of fiber for every 1,000 calories you should consume. So women, basically about 28 grams of fiber every day. More is better. So look for ways to add more fiber with adding vegetables and also in your grain products. Okay. So spaghetti squash. It is really easy to cook a spaghetti squash in a slow cooker. Because I always have problems cutting the darn thing. You're supposed to cut them in half in order to roast them. And even though I've got nice knives, they are hard to cut to roast. But in a slow cooker, you just poke them a few times to let the steam out while they're cooking. Put them in the slow cooker with some water. You come home, you slice it up, and then you shred it up, and you've got spaghetti squash ready for homemade sauce, your Marie's chicken spaghetti kind of recipe, whatever you want. But it really is really easy. As I mentioned, I liked easy. And speaking of that, saving time for cleanup. Like Marie, I don't usually buy bags because I'm cheap, but because pan spray seems to work just fine, which I'm reminded of when I occasionally forget to spray it. But you spray it down, you throw your things in. If it's really gooey stuff, in this case, this is a picture of was chocolate Nutella bread pudding, and it was really sticky. And so it was nice to have it in a bag. So that was easy. But generally speaking, just make sure that you're not, because who wants to be there scrubbing your slow cooker crock when you're done eating? You have better things to do with your time. So just a few food safety tips, and this is a really good link. The link's really good for a publication from the USDA. But as I mentioned earlier, don't prep on the crock. Prevent cross-contamination. And something else that people do, and I see recipes online for this as well, is they talk about putting frozen meat in your slow cooker. Also, we would consider that a no-no related to food safety, because once again, while your meat's thawing, it's going to be in that danger zone where bacteria tends to grow. So thaw your meat in the refrigerator, the day before, and put it in your slow cooker to cook. All right. Is this you or me? I think it's you.
Okay, well, sure. So how much liquid? And that's always really a good question. So that goes back to my veggie lasagna reference. I add that extra half of a jar of water to the recipe while I'm sauteing all of those vegetables after I've sauteed them and I put the sauce in, just because I need to make sure that there is enough liquid to cook those noodles adequately. You don't want things to be dry. You have to learn your recipes, and it's just like other items you have in your kitchen. I have several slow cookers, and I will tell you that I have one that absolutely I will never cook anything in it other than on low, because it just heats up more than the other. So not only learning your recipe, but also learning your actual cookers. And sometimes there's a little trial and error, but I would always encourage you to make notes. I make notes on all of my recipes, especially if I'm trying something new. And then after we have that meal, I go back and I write notes, add more of this, not so much of that, things like that. It really helps with remembering what you did. I also do note if I put it in a slow cooker bag. I'm like Julie, I don't tend to really buy those, but there are a few recipes that I do use those for just because of cleanup. And one of them is like a Polynesian chicken recipe, and it's boneless, skinless chicken breast. So I'll use like 4 to 6 of those. And it's a cup of brown sugar and a half cup of soy sauce. And I do get the lower sodium version of the soy sauce. And then you put in 1 can of pineapple chunks, one of the big cans, like a 16-ounce can. And that's it. And you can serve that over rice, and it is really delicious. But again, that goes back to cleanup. And that's one recipe, because you add that brown sugar in there, and anything that's going to caramelize like that with the pineapple chunks, that's going to be a real hard thing to clean up. So also the right amount of product. You don't want your slow cooker to be so full that your liquid will dry out and everything on top is going to be, really dry, and the stuff on the bottom is going to be burned. So you need to make sure that you have the appropriate size cooker for the recipe you're using. And I have a larger one and I have a smaller one, and I interchange those just to make sure that we are, using the right cooker for the right product. So converting recipes. So that goes back to keeping in mind some of the items that you're putting in there. Sometimes there are a few things that I don't put in at the very beginning, but rather when I come home for that last, few minutes of cooking, 30 minutes or 45 minutes, I might add something in. So for example, we like whole green beans, but if you leave them in there all day long, they kind of get really super mushy, and my husband hates mushy green beans. We kind of like for them to have a little bit of bite to them still. So if you think about when you steam them, it only takes about 5 or 6 minutes to steam them. So if you're looking at this converting chart, then I would just put them in for about the last 30 minutes of cooking. 30 minutes to an hour, and they'll still, be a good food product, so to speak, to our palates. Does that make sense to everybody, Julie? Does
It does, because I add cabbage sometime and some other things towards the end. And one of the recipes in there, which is, I think, the jambalaya, you put an orzo, which is a pasta that's kind of rice shaped in the middle.
So you have to just be mindful of what it is you're doing, but you can convert a recipe pretty easily. So these dessert ideas, so these are actually what I had on hand, because, we all are not just running right out to the grocery store at any moment. So I had just some very small Red Delicious apples. And so I decided that I would go ahead and try to bake those. They weren't true baking apples, but they turned out awesome. This is one of the times that I would not spray my crock because of the apples. I didn't want there to be a oily type mixture in there. So that is one of the few times, but I actually did put about a half a cup of water in the bottom. So if you hit the next slide over.
Sure.
That is actually how I prepped them. I actually cored them. And then I took my knife and I slit down the side of the apples so that they wouldn't, split while they were cooking. I put just a small tab of butter in there, And then some of them I stuffed with cranberries because I did not have raisins, and I usually put raisins in there. So you can see where I'd stuffed one with cranberries. And then I put brown sugar and a little bit of cinnamon. So it's whatever you like. Just put whatever you choose. And those turned out really great. They were really soft. They cooked a little bit quicker because they were very small apples. I mean, you can look at how the size of them compared to my hand. You can see that they were smaller, but they turned out really, really well. I will also encourage you, if you have a little trivet that you can put into the bottom of your crock pot, or you have one that goes with some other cooking item that you might have, put it in the bottom of your crock pot. Add that half a cup of water. I have put ramekins of chocolate cake mix in there and made little chocolate lava cakes. Your imagination is limit, and you go back to that converting the recipe slide. And so I would have cooked those for about 20 to 25 minutes in the oven. So, you know, depending on if I wanted to cook them over a longer period of time or a shorter period of time, I would convert that recipe. So it's really simple to adapt and use different things. So just let your imagination run wild. So what do we have next? So simplifying. Julie, this mirror you.
It can be me, since I handed off to you earlier in the last one. So really, using your slow cooker really can simplify both your meal prep and your overall life. You know, but do think about planning ahead, cooking once, you know, eating 2 or 3 times. And I make a notebook of my favorite recipes. So then I just open up that notebook and figure out what it is I'm going to eat the week when I have no clue when I'm thinking about it. Use a list. I know you can't remind you often enough. Make sure you have a list when you go to the store, because there's nothing more frustrating than not having something when you get home. And, you know, don't go for the funky recipes. All the recipes we gave you here, these ingredients are going to be things that you have in your house, you know. So don't go crazy unless you really enjoy cooking that way, but also don't go crazy and overstock. You know, just because it's on sale doesn't mean you have to buy 10 of it. And so you should, you know, we want to encourage you, if you have a slow cooker, to use it more often. If you don't have one, if it's getting dusty, dust that thing out and use it again. It's going to save you time. Lots of easy prep meals. It's getting hot. It's not going to overheat up your kitchen, and the food tastes great. And so, sorry that we did go over a half an hour, but we are ready and hanging out for questions. And one question I'll go ahead and answer, which is no, Marie's pineapple chicken recipe is not in the handout, but I will get it from her.
Yeah.
And we'll send it out to you, because
Absolutely, not a problem.
We've got your email, so we'll just send that out, and I'll also send out the links to the handouts again. And once the recording's up, I will send that out. You'll get that information probably tomorrow. So what questions do we have, Wendy?
So, all right, Marie and Julie.
Yes.
You did mention that it would be a good idea to put the noodles and the pasta later, not at the beginning, so they don't get too soft. Do you know how long, like when those should be added?
Well, the orzo and the chicken jambalaya goes like in the last half an hour. And I will admit that I have not been overly, besides making macaroni and cheese, I have not been overly successful in cooking pasta. So Marie may have an answer.
So when I do my veggie lasagna, as I said before, I use the wheat pasta, which takes a little bit longer to cook, but I never go over 3 hours, because then the palatability of those noodles starts to degrade. They just don't maintain the texture that we prefer. So it's one of those things that is a little bit of trial and error, I suppose you would say, and it does depend on your recipe. But going back to the conversion chart, you know, if you think about how long it would take to cook that pasta traditionally on the stovetop, and then you try to transition that over to your slow cooker, it's one of those things that you have to just do a little bit of trial and error with, and that's how I landed on the 3 hours for my veggie lasagna.
Okay. So there was another question about how do you keep the meat moist? How do you keep it from drying out?
A lot of recipes call for water, a little bit, but not like if you're cooking it like a stew on the pot. So it's more of a closed system with the Instapot. I mean, sorry, with the slow cooker. Um, so, so for example, when I make a stew, I put maybe a half a cup or so in there, and that's enough. And don't go by, and especially if you have kids at home, have them opening the lid to smell it, because that lets your steam out and get some of your moisture out, and also lengthens the cooking time. So that's why sometimes it's great to start playing around with a recipe, and then start with a recipe and play around to make things like you like them.
So Wendy, do you see any other questions that weren't answered?
Let's see.
I saw that there are a bunch of questions related to the liners. They say they're in my local grocery store. They're up kind of on the top shelf, over kind of near like the Ziploc bag area. I think Reynolds makes them, but
And
Yeah.
so have you ever had problems using those bags?
no, they're made specifically for a slow cooker.
Okay.
Yes.
And what
And,
I
I
recommend.
did see one question about the apple recipe, and I put about a half a cup of water in the bottom of the crock, and then I put my apples in that are prepped and ready to go. And the reason for the water in the bottom of the crock is to create more steam to keep those apples really moist.
So I know a couple of folks had questions about the food safety in the bags, and what I recommend is definitely just contact the manufacturer of that particular bag if you have specific questions, so those can be answered for that particular product. On a side note, there was a question, and this was from one of the first slides about having the chicken in a plastic bag. It says take it out and cook. Do you cook in the slow cooker while it's in the plastic bag? And I'm not sure what it was. One of the
Okay,
first.
that was the roast chicken. No.
Yep.
You put it, so when you slather all your spices on top of on your chicken the night before, and I just put it in a plastic bag so it was ready to pull out of the bag the next morning and put it in my slow cooker. I mean, if you had a big enough container to put a chicken in to keep it moist while it was sitting there overnight with all the tasty spices soaking into the skin, that's fine. I just don't happen to have it. And so I just, slathered it with spices, stuck it in the bag, pulled it out of the bag, and sprayed my slow cooker down and plopped the chicken in.
And so talking about moist, how do you keep the meat moist? I know a couple of folks have mentioned about whether it's chicken, brisket, it falls apart, but it's dry. And so how do you make the meats moist or keep them moist, especially if you're cooking for a long period of time?
My recommendation is to make sure you, again, have adequate amount of liquid when you start out to create that steam that Julie was referencing that holds the more of the moisture in. So if they're looking at a particular recipe, having, extra chicken broth added or something like that, just to maintain that moisture.
Any
So
other suggestions on that? Sorry, Wendy.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say there was a comment as to that, and it said, I cover the whole thing and it still ends up dry.
You may be cooking it too long. So it depends, because I really haven't had problems with stuff drying out unless it's like I cooked it to death. I have problems. I switched to when I make beef stew, and because by the time I get to work and get home, it's more than 8 hours, and I found out that I had better luck doing a chuck roast, that it didn't dry out, versus the cube stew beef, which are sometimes inconsistent with what actually meat they used, and that they would just kind of fall apart and get a little tough.
And that's true. It can depend on your cut of meat. And so if you do use something really, really lean, you have to remember that it has a lower fat content. So you're going to have to accommodate that with liquid.
Thank you, guys. And I know we've had a couple issues with the links not working. So if we can send those out with the evaluation, that would be great.
Sure.
So do you ladies have any suggestions for fish? You cautioned against fish, but is there any successful way to prepare fish?
Mm, I haven't had any. Well, fish is just going to overcook. So, for example, on the jambalaya recipe, it has you put the shrimp in, so you cook it all day with. It's got chicken thighs and I think sausage in it. And then you put the shrimp in like the last half hour. And actually, it's pre-cooked shrimp. So the problem with the slow cooker is that your seafood is really gonna be overcooked. So that's really not a great. Slow cooker is really not a great way for seafood. You need to lose. I bet you can do it in Instapot, but a steamer or just baking it or grilling, it's probably going to give you a lot better product than a slow cooker.
Thank you.
So anything else? Since we have gone way over time, but we like to talk and we like to cook. So so next week, for those of you who don't know, an electric pressure cooker is the same as the trade name Instapot. And Sarah Ellis from Citrus, who's doing the class, has been doing electric pressure cooker classes for over a year now, and she is like the I call her the trade name, the Instapot Queen. So she's going to have a lot of really good information and experience, which I don't have on that topic. So, one last quick question: would you recommend browning meat before the pressure cooker? Sometimes it'll seal in some of the flavors. So depends on if you have time. So with that, if you have any questions, you can always email me. We will send out the evaluation. I will at least put the link to the handout at the end of the evaluation. I can't put more than one link in there. It won't work, but I will also send you an email tomorrow that's got the handout links again and also the link to the recording after I get it uploaded. And so you'll have all that information, and I will get the Polynesian chicken recipe from Marie. So
I will send it to you.
So with that, we want to thank you again for taking part in today's webinar, and we look forward to seeing you next week for the one on using electric